Hello everybody, welcome back to another video on the channel, and in today's video I want to review the new PvP season KI Live that happened about 3 days ago now, and I just want to apologize real quick for not uploading a lot lately. It's been like probably 11 days, which is really abnormal for me, but I have been streaming more on YouTube, so there's that, I guess. But yes, this KI Live was okay. We've had worse, we've had better. Wasn't too bad at all. And in today's video, we are going to go over everything that you guys are going to probably want to know and, just any general updates.
So I know with the new season, we've been observing how the meta has changed around things such as auras. We know there's a lot of people talking about aura manipulations, whether aura ping pong, as they're calling it, is a real thing, whether they like it or not, how it feels to play. We've noticed that the tier have shifted. Players had initially put Mitt at the very bottom of the tier list, and I recently watched, I think it was either Awesome, the Saucer Liams, or maybe both, their tier list, and they both noted that Myth is no longer at the bottom of the tier list. So it's interesting to see different meta changes and how the player perception of the metas have been going.
Okay, so real quick, I want to touch on the aura spam and the myth in general in the meta right now. So basically, to my understanding, the community is a little bit divided with the aura ping pong. Some people believe if you cast a galvanic and then it gets countered by like a starfall or an attenuate, you should still have your galvanic. And other people like that there's actually pretty good counters, I guess you could say like counters to auras in the game, whether it's like a galvanic or a brace. Now, the reason I personally don't mind the aura ping pong, again, I'm not a big fan of it, okay? But the reason I like it is because, brace was a problem before this update, and they decided to buff not only brace with stabilize and the copy limits, but, resist has gone completely out of hand, right? So things have gone kind of crazy, but it's really nice to have the option to counter a brace, but most often when you counter a brace now, you're either going to get hit with a counter like Shoe and Chameleon, or because you can combine brace and stabilize up till 9 copies, I believe, with an item card, they just brace over it again, right? So in my opinion, I think the better solution here would have been to just fix brace and not put stabilize in the game, to not, have players like me wanting, desperate aura counters in the game to deal with, the super high resist and brace and stabilize in the game right now. You know what I mean? So I think until they can at least fix resist and brace and all that stuff, it should probably stay the way it is right now. Or maybe they could, copy limit some of them, because I said 9 braces and stabilizers combined. It's just a little much right now in the meta. Now, briefly, I want to talk about Myth. Now, Myth was like at the bottom of the barrel, but basically all that's changed because, again, we didn't actually get an update. Is Myths just figured out instead of, engaging with the system and, doing like Storm or Shamble or something, which by the way isn't terrible. But instead of that, you're just going to double down on the whole PvE myth thing and run Glimpse. And Glimpse is insanely broken right now, right? So you basically say, screw countering anything. I'm just going to buff, and one-shot my opponent and not have to care about anything, right? So, for example, right now, at the start of the meta, Storm, I would say, is pretty favored to beat Myth. It's still kind of like a 50-50 now, but I would say now, if if the Myth's dueling with Glimpse, the Myth is going to win that every single time, right? Even with Storm Elf and Catch of the Day right now and Shrike, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So basically, all that changed is Myth Wizards were trying to engage with the meta in the game, but that wasn't working, so they doubled down and I guess adapted to the whole aura ping pong meta, and they're just really doubling down on the whole PvE myth stack.
Dark Pact and Empower do death damage. Someone brought up with me and asked if we could quote fix that. I don't know if it's broken or not.
Well, they don't do death damage. They do mid damage. Sorry, moon damage. We had changed it. They used to do death damage, but the problem with it is that they still use Death Wizard's damage stat. So even though it's doing moon damage, which is better than when it did death damage, because then it used to take your blades and stuff, it's still doing more damage to Death Wizard since they have the highest death damage. So I believe we were considering at some point to change it to a set portion of health, correct, Ben?
Yeah, I mean that's what I would like to do. I'm not sure that it's important enough to put it on top of our tech stack. But I think I'd prefer that all of the self health sacrifice spells take a portion of your health.
Okay, so basically what he's saying here is cards like Empower, Dark Pact, maybe Juju if it ever come back in the game, is basically going to take a certain percentage of your health. So for example, if I Empower instead of doing like, I don't know, 200 damage right now in the current state of the game, it might do like 10%, which would be like, 1,000, 1,500 maybe, depending on what school you're on. So, that's kind of what they're talking about here. I think that wouldn't be a good change in my opinion, because I feel like that kind of takes away from the whole like Wiz feel, because we're all used to empowering a Dark Pact off or empowering a weakness off and Dark Pacting a weakness off. You know what I mean? Oh my god, I'm speaking crazy right now, but that's kind of the whole satisfying part of the Wiz feeling, So I think that would be a bad change in my opinion. Just again takes away from the game and making Wiz feel like Wiz. So I'd like to see them go with a better solution. Obviously, the simple one would be just to make it not be death damage. Just make it be like whatever else it could be in the game. So deaths can empower and deaths can Dark Pact like everyone else.
It would have some downstream impacts though, such as people like using empowers to take off weaknesses and stuff. Flat percent damage would bypass that. So powers would no longer be like a weakness clear at that point. It would just be you're sacrificing a portion of your health for the pips.
See, Stormbringer actually gets it, y'all, because Stormbringer actually has played the game. He, does PvP. He's not like, Marshall and Warlord, but, he kicks around like night and bad. Like, he's not terrible, but he understands the game enough to relate to it and play it. So, that's why, in my opinion, Stormbringer is actually one of the better devs for, like, advanced content and that kind of stuff. But, really good here to see that Stormbringer actually understands what I just said actually here with me reacting to it and the community. He relates to it. So really good stuff, really good looks for KI there.
The state of PvP, well, okay, that's a little bit broad. And the lack of school identity, we disagree with that. I, as a main life, cannot set up any gambits as dots or hots, and it's so annoying to have them take away instantly. I lost to 3 storms back-to-back last night. So this is a complaint that they can't set up their gambits because they're being countered.
Okay, first of all, life is the best school. You pretty much beat every school in the game except for balance. Even that, it's probably a 50-50, let's be honest, depending on deck RNG and all. But generally, we live in the state of Counterwiz, right? I assume this is probably a lower ranked person talking, like probably like recruit to sergeant, I would say. Maybe veteran max, I would say. But basically, if you see a storm, you're not going to try and set up a hot gambit or a not gambit. Okay, when you see a storm, what you want to do is Goat Monk because that outtrades the storm counters, right? And Hunting Worm is also pretty good because they can't counter both, and if they do, they're mental, it's terrible. You'll just outtrade them, assuming you pace your pips well and, you play well. What I think this person is actually talking about, though, is the fact of the matter that Wiz has gotten so stale and repetitive. This is a pretty common take in the community actually, but the whole counter Wiz meta they've kind of made, it's just really boring, and even when you win, it doesn't really feel good because typically when you load in the match and see the person on the other side, it's like, oh, this is an auto win matchup. Oh, I'm gonna auto lose, 9 times out of 10. So no longer is there that feeling at the end of the match where it's like, oh yeah, I really beat like a tough matchup, or you don't really feel that good anymore, unfortunately, because it's gotten so repetitive.
I do. Which ones? You want to know the win rates? I'm looking at now. I like now to reduce my data set to the last 7 days, right? And so I can play with that parameter to look across lots of things, but I'm just looking at the last 7 days. Nothing. I don't think we've changed really anything significant in the last 7 days. I could maybe brought it to 14. I thought I would change things much. So last 7 days is the data set. Max level only.
I'm probably gonna say that Storm's gonna be in like the top 3 or 4 because typically, I mean, there's only like 2 Storms usually that are high rank, and I like got Warlord again recently, and I was just winning every game off stream. So, considering this is pretty much only high rank or mostly high rank, I wouldn't be surprised if Storm is like top 2, 3, 4. I think 5 would be generous. Not gonna be last place though, since I got Warlord. So we'll see though. Probably like Life. I don't know. Balance, Storm, Myth as the top 4. I'd say.
And Knight and above, right? So max level, Knight and above, last 7 days. It goes, and bear with me, it goes Life,
Yeah.
Storm.
I guess I was right.
I'm double checking. Could that be right?
Yeah, I got Warlord, so.
It is right.
I would be surprised.
Life, Storm,
yeah.
Balance,
yeah.
Myth.
Oh, I was literally right.
Ice, Death,
Almost
Fire.
like I understand the game, and they time me out for a week in the Discord, by the way.
The chat will find that as surprising as I do. Like, no
I was
way!
right. But I get banned from the Discord. Nice, bro. Oh.
Yeah, where's Liam with the buff Storm? I don't see Liam in the chat.
Well, it's number 2 because
it's
I
number
got
2 at
Warlord.
the moment. Is that Recruit
Because I
Plus
did.
or is that Knight Plus?
Nobody else did.
Actually, one thing that did happen in the meta that we could point out is that we changed the way that the Elo distribution was being shifted, and I think that a lot of people who were at Knight and above, especially say marshals and above, who weren't queuing before, might have gone back to queue with their their better ranked whizzes, and so that might have something to do with it as well. In other words, since they didn't feel as if their rating was at risk as much with the change to Elo, they may have pulled them out and started playing with them more. So more skilled players who had mothballed their Storm Wizards, for example, might have pulled them out and started playing on them again.
It's interesting though because Life is at the top of the meta, so I would expect like Storm being second if Life is at the top. Kind of tracks, but Death being second to last is really interesting because.
Well, the reason for this is equally skilled Storms and Life right now is like a 50-50. Storm doesn't really counter Life at the top of the meta. It's like a 50-50 matchup. And Death doesn't really counter Life right now in the meta either. Life beats Death like 9 times out of 10, I would say. Maybe 8 times out of 10. Probably 8 times out of 10, yeah. But that's kind of why. The counters don't really work against Life right now, whether you're a Storm or a Death. And they kind of need to look into fixing that.
Basically what I did is instead of having the Elo distribution, for example, be like 20 versus 4, depending on who has the higher rating, now it's going to be closer to 15 and 9. And of course, it's going to change depending on what rank you are, because we tend to move Elo around in bigger chunks at the low rank players, so it doesn't take as long to get out of Recruit. You can get out of Recruit a little faster. But once you get up into the higher ranks, there's basically 24 points of rating at stake. If you think of it as in terms of like a bid or a bet, they're both players are sort of putting that their rating at stake in the match. So going from 20 to 4 to 15 to 9, and I did that by essentially doubling sort of the impact of the weight factor in the Elo calculation. If you guys are familiar with Elo, like if you wanted to Google it and see how it works, then I'm using terms that you could apply yourself. So the weight factor doubled, and that's why you see the distribution is sort of changing by about double on the low end. So 15 and 9 should be about the most extreme exchange you see now instead of 20 and 4. The TLDR.
Okay, well let's talk about this. I would say generally the high rank community pretty happy with this. I would say there's a couple of people who aren't the vocal minority, I would say. And the more lower ranks to the middle ranks, I've kind of feel like I've heard feedback that is saying that it's harder for them to rank up, like if you're like Knight in bed, which I find a little odd actually, but personally going from Captain to Marshal to Warlord has felt way better. It's still really frustrating losing like 2 or 3 games worth of progress like RNG or a counter matchup, but it's not like 5, 6, or 7 like it was before this update. So it doesn't feel as bad. And if you queue a good school like Life or Balance right now, where it's kind of hard to lose on, it's pretty easy to get Warlord right now in this meta. Let's be honest, guys. But generally for the game, I would say this is a step in the right direction. For the overall, majority of the game, it's a lot more healthy of an elo system, right? Compared to other games, again, it's typically, if you lose to a lower ranked player, it's probably like 2, maybe 3 max games lost, right? So at least Wiz is on the right track with, it being 2 or 3 at the higher levels of play. No other game I'm aware of in the industry punishes you at like 6, 7, 5, 8 games, whatever. If you lose to RNG or a counter, that was terrible game design. I'm sorry, guys. Worst rank system ever in the history of gaming. I don't know how y'all did it, but you did. But at least it's gone, and you're at least at the industry standard now. So, good job, Ki. It's felt a lot better.
And the nice thing about these changes is they don't require code changes, and they don't require more than about 5 minutes of work. About 10 seconds for me to tell Roberto to change it, and then, maybe 5 minutes for him to change it.
Then why did it take like a year or 2 to change?
The other thing that I did was, and I'm not sure that it's actually something the players will notice, is that I moved up the sort of the importance of a player's win streak in terms of matching, which means that players who have more recent wins will tend to be matched against other players with more recent wins, right? And so that is something that's sort of going on behind the scenes to match winners versus winners and losers versus losers more often. But again, I'm not sure that I didn't move it up so far in the criteria that it becomes the dominant factor, but I moved it up, a few notches. And so it should do some interesting things, I hope, in terms of making sure that players who are generally speaking winning are playing against players who are generally speaking winning. And I think probably the most impactful thing about that is that players who tend to flee a lot, you're gonna have long losing streaks, I think. So if you can, don't. We do prefer players to actually play out their matches. That is kind of just a courtesy that you want to extend to your opponent, is to actually get in and play the match. Now, granted, I understand there are some players whose play style you might not appreciate, and so from time to time you might just say, my time is better spent not going through this match, and so you could probably get away with that from time to time. So there you go.
One thing I want to say about that is that's probably one of the first things I noticed, at least at higher levels of play, high rank, is typically it's about like on a 3 or 4 win streak, I would say. You notice your queue times get absolutely insane. Even on stream, y'all have noticed it too. Like the queue times do feel longer at high ranks. I'm talking like 1900 plus, by the way, 1850 plus. It's been kind of bad. Honestly, it's like 20 to 30 minute queue times sometimes, even when I'm live, when you have that win streak going. So, I mean, I can appreciate it, but again, I don't know. I mean, the queue time thing is tough, right? Because Wiz, I don't want to, be a doomer here, but PvP isn't really too alive. It's a little bit dead in a way, let's be honest. So, I would prefer waiting longer queue times to get people around my rank, right? I don't want to wait 20 to 30 minutes like I am right now to still only get someone who is at the lowest level, bottom of the barrel, like veteran 1600 rank. I don't want that. If I'm waiting 20 to 30 minutes for a queue time at high rank, I want it to be somebody around my actual rank so it's worth my time, Because a lot of the time right now, let's say my Storm, for example, right? You'd wait 20 to 30 minutes, on a winning streak, right? 3-4 winning streak. And then, guess what? It's a, 1600 ranked counter matchup that gets a little bit lucky. And boom, 3 games are just out the window for me. And I have to wait a long time to get that rank back again. And the queue times, it's just not that good, So I'm not really a fan of it. I can appreciate it, of course, but I've definitely felt it though. Like it's one of the first things I noticed in the updates at high ranks. Not really too big of a fan of it personally, but if y'all like it, like the majority of the community, that's fine. Good for y'all. I'm just speaking about my experience personally.
Well, to me, the healing the healing solution starts at a very, very simple point, which is at the moment, like healing is the only reactive mitigation that reverses the progress of a match. And that concept is weaponized by people who then create a match that has no end. And so that's kind of where I start. Like, I try to clearly define what my
he's got the right
impression
idea
of the problem is. And then we can start to talk about solutions if there's agreement, right? I don't know that anyone has a problem with healing in general. The problem they have is that it becomes overwhelming to the point where you'd rather flee because you don't know when the match is going to end ever.
Yep, I mean, that's exactly it, right? Take like an ice versus life, for example, right? Even if the ice plays out of their mind, it's not like they can't control if the other person wants to just sit there and stall out forever. They can't. They can't. It feels terrible. And unless King's Owl makes the counters like way better, like changes Skeletal Pirate to be like, hit into infections or something like that, we're gonna just have this problem, you know what I mean? With the whole jading meta and stuff like that. So in my opinion, there needs to be a better solution than just copy limits, because the copy limits are already being abused. You can jade if you want right now, but a lot of people don't because you get banned pretty quickly nowadays, right? So yeah, they should probably just figure out a better solution. I know they've talked about, making like a heal cap. So for example, you can't, heal for more than 6,000 in one game. Let's just pick a random number. And after you get to 6,000 healing in that match, your next heal, let's say you cast another heal, you're not going to get any healing. It's just going to be a hanging effect, like a blade, like a shield, like a trap, like everything else. You know what I mean? So I kind of like that idea. It'd give more gambit play in the meta. So I don't know. It would be a nerf to life, but it would fix the problem, and you could at least look forward and like see a light and be like, oh my god, their healing's gonna be done soon.
No, I've talked to Liam before about we know Storm dual schooling is an issue. It's just there's not a good solution to it. That's the problem. I mean, we could just accept the ridiculous stat values on the pens that we would have to get to.
And it's really ridiculous. It'd be like 300+% on like say if you're trying to dual school into life in order to get a life spell to hit at Storm's PvP.
And then I didn't like dynamically modifying spell values based on school, just because it's just, I don't know. From a user experience.
Okay, so basically what they're talking about there is basically almost not every build in the game, but most of the meta right now, when you dual school, you can hit the max damage and pierce, right? So Death hits their off-school damage cap, their, pierce cap, right? But Storm can't. No matter what they do, they can't and stay competitive like every other school in the game right now, right? So they're talking about trying to fix like the TPP gap, essentially. So like Stormbringer was saying, if I wanted to duel like, Death, Ice, or Life, it would be like 300% damage I would need to be equally competitive as the other schools in the game right now. That'd be nice, but I think that is a little crazy. I think Rapbeard thinks that too, judged off of, his facial expression. But the most fair thing they could do right now, and the bare minimum, is they could allow Storm to hit their off-school stat max just like every other school, right? Because every other school hits their meta stats no problem and their off-school stats no problem. Storm struggles to even get their on-school stats, let alone their off-school stats are nowhere where they need to be, right? Like if you compare any school, by the way, but let's take the extremes like Ice or Myth, cast the same spell like Fire Elf, they both have max pins. The Ice and Myth are going to do way more off-school damage than the Storm is, even though it's a Storm, right? Because the stat difference. So it is a pretty big problem, and especially at the high ranks of play, you really just like manipulate the whole thing. Like when I'm on my ice against Storm, I just make them spam fire spells, and even though they are playing better because I'm abusing the stat difference, I just win every time, right? So it kind of the same thing with the Myth matchup in a way, but with Myth you kind of have to not mess up. So
we've been over this, right?
Yeah.
It's not that far off. If you were to suddenly give Storm all the same, if Storm was able to hit with Storm spells across the board via the pins, Storm will blow everybody out of the water, because you can see where the combat is balanced now.
Okay, but Pyre Dragon is blowing storms out of the water right now, present day. So why does a death get to blow a storm out of the water, but a storm can't do that even against a fire, or let alone anybody else? How is that fair? It's not. That's the answer.
How often Storm is hitting with a school that is not Storm, and
well, you can't hit with an off school on a storm, right? That's why storms only pack like 2 elephants and like, I don't know, let's 3, like maybe 5 off school cards that are like hits, right? You don't pack a lot because you have to rely on your mono school because the off school is so freaking bad. It's terrible. You can't get the accuracy, you can't get the pierce, the damage, the DPP, nothing. You're losing all around the board. And I'm going to statistically prove this, by the way, in a video I'm making about this, but I know they haven't tested the off-school taps because every time, no matter what test you do, Storm comes out in last place because they are unable to hit their stat caps, and they have the DPP burden and the worst stats, like, you know, health resist, whatever. So I know they're just capping. They literally, it's not. You can't. Storm gets 130 damage and 51 pierce right now in the meta. You kind of got to fix it. It's not really fair that other schools get to play the game and Storm does it.
How much of the value of that spell is in the damage? That's the differential, and those are very hard questions.
Utility
to answer,
and
right?
damage
How
matters.
Often is Storm going to hit with those? So it becomes a tricky problem.
Well, and to kind of play devil's advocate with this is when we talk about cosplaying.
Well, Storm can never cosplay, right? Because they just die so fast, right? The opponent can kill you equally as fast as you can kill them, but they get to off school and cosplay as well. It's just fair game at that point.
With chromatic mitigation, we're saying that cosplaying has to be an alternative. It's not a good one. You're giving up crit, you're giving up pip conserve and other things, but in a pinch, you know, if you have to, if somebody's hard countering your primary, then you can find a pathway to lethal that ends up hitting off school.
You can't do that on a Storm. It's terrible. The more you try to do that, the more you lose statistically. It doesn't work.
That only works if, or that effectiveness is worsened the larger your DPP delta is from your baseline. And so if you run into a situation as a Storm where you feel like you need to hit off school primarily for that match, cosplaying for that match, you're at a greater disadvantage than other schools. I think that's sort of the...
Yeah, well, that's objectively true, right?
That could be the problem. Now we can talk about the severity of the problem.
Well, none of the counters work, right? And you can't even get the accuracy to cast them because your stats are so bad. That's the problem. That's the problem, bro.
But I would say that's the main issue.
And again, I think the biggest thing here is just to make the game fair. Give Storm off-school accuracy like other schools get right now in the meta, and let them hit their damage cap and the pierce cap on their off-school like every other school right now can in the meta, because as of right now, it's literally not possible to do it on a Storm. And if you try to, by the way, you still can't even hit it if you try to, but even when you try that build, you give up everything and you'll just lose more games. So it's terrible. It doesn't work.
There's open debate on the design team. Like, I disagree with Ben. I'm on the opposite end, where I think Storm should have the same dual school capacity as the others. And my counter to Ben's argument that Storm would blow everyone out of the water would be
Pyre Dragon already does it.
Combat metal around that.
Power Dragon
Because
already
if
does
Storm
it.
is just hitting at Storm's DPP, and we're saying the combat model is balanced in that Storm DPP is even with everyone else's DPP, then it should even out.
Yeah, and I
So-
think it does. I mean, we see that in practice. I think it does when they're using Storm. It's when they're not using Storm, they're at a greater disadvantage than others, and they don't have
exactly.
a lot of, because they're glass cannon school. They don't have as much leeway. They don't have as much.
Yeah,
guess,
like every time you do that, like a
from,
counter like that, you just mess up. It's a mess up,
mitigation
basically.
or survivability.
Assuming
There's
you
just
play
not
well.
a good solution. I mean,
I understand
each one
that.
of them
I
has
get it.
some
Well,
jankiness to it.
just to play it out mathematically, if you were to say quadruple everybody's health, as a wild hypothetical, everybody gets 4 times as much health relative to each other, then the matches would take longer, and you would see a difference, right? Storm might have more leeway to do that, or they might find themselves using off-school hits more often, and therefore falling farther and farther behind. Right. So, but as it stands,
yeah, it's the latter. You'd use off-school hits more. You'd have to, and you'd fall further and further behind every time you do it. It's the latter. Yeah.
Now with it tuned to, and Storm matches, by the way, I think the floor on matches for Storm is too low. I would like to see Storm get some more health. Probably when the level cap goes up. That's one of the things. Or resist. Yeah, they definitely do need to catch up on resist.
Or the pierce needs to go down, right? Like a death and balance did not need like a 10 pierce buff back in like Novus or Lemuria, whenever that was. They were fine at like 46, and now they got like 10 more, right? There should not be a 2 pierce difference between balance, death, and Storm. That is ridiculous. Storm should be up there with Myth and Fire. Not above them, but they should be in the Myth and Fire league. Because, like, what are we doing here, honestly? Alright, that's pretty much everything, y'all. So, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's going to be a longer one, probably. But, yeah, I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you for being here, and take care, guys.